Doc Ellis stands at the baseball field in Thornburg Park. He is slated to pitch on Wednesday against the Los Angeles Dodgers. His previous start saw him pitch the 174th no-hitter in Major League history, a performance that his name will be forever tied to, one that will define him whether he likes it or not. But none of that matters here. What matters to Doc are the home runs he used to hit in this field as a youth beginning to realize his talent. What matters is the generosity he felt from the white kids that would show him respect in a time when respect wasn't required for someone of his color. But what matters most of all is the day when all of that came crashing down, when they redrew the boundaries to determine who was eligible to play in this field. They kept everything the same, with only one exception, a carve-out right where the Ellis family's household sat, and thus stoked the flame that would burn over the course of Doc Ellis's career. While I was doing the iceberg video, I couldn't help but notice how many players whose names are tied to a single infamous moment from their career. Take Robin Ventura, for instance. Played 15 seasons with an 806 OPS, 6 gold gloves, borderline Hall of Famer even. But you search his name in Google Images, and there's Nolan Ryan handing his ass to him. There it is again, and again. This moment, a blip in the storied career of a great player, will forever define him in the eyes of the layman, and might even outlive all of us. But no other player struck this chord with me more than Doc Ellis. Let's be honest here. It's a great story. This is one of the few pieces of baseball lore that has permeated outside the cultural bounds of baseball, alongside Wade Boggs' alcoholism and the Cubs winning their first World Series in 116 years, which honestly at this point feels like half a century ago. I was actually in line at Guitar Center with my cousin when I told him that I was doing a video on Doc Ellis. The cashier overheard me and acknowledged the fact that he too knew who Doc Ellis was. He didn't really add much to the conversation though, more that he, a non-baseball fan, knew the story of the guy who was able to achieve a storied historical feat that means a great deal to baseball fans, while under the influence of a psychedelic. What I've learned about Doc since working on this video is that to only think of him as the guy who pitched a no-hitter on acid is to discredit one of baseball's truly interesting men. We're going to go back to 1970, the year in which it happened. The no-hitter will be a part of the story, but only a small part. I'm not going to lie. Doc isn't entirely a sympathetic character here, but his story reveals what many of us don't think about when watching a game of baseball. I hope you all enjoy. I genuinely do. Doc is set to make his first start of the season. He has always exceeded any expectations given to him, and despite a broken leg the year prior, he was dominating the AAA Pirates affiliate by the time he was 23. The secret to Doc's success? Fear. See, Doc didn't just see baseball as a game. He saw it as war. He didn't see a baseball diamond, but a battlefield. Pitching wasn't throwing a ball, but firing artillery at the enemy. Batters weren't up there to hit, but to provide a counter defense. Maybe Doc got this mindset from his father and namesake, who served in the army during World War II. Maybe it came from an upbringing that he believed would have landed him in prison if not for baseball. Nevertheless, the matchup between life and death is what drove his desire to be great. This mentality led to the Pirates calling up Doc as a reinforcement in June to help take some heat off of their fledgling team. Doc would pay immediate dividends upon his call-up, putting up a 2.50 ERA in his rookie season, which would be the 8th best for a rookie in the pitching-heavy 1960s. 1969 saw an uneven year for Ellis. At a time when losses were worn on a pitcher like a scarlet letter, Ellis saw his team lose 19 games when he took the mound, 17 of those being charged directly to him. 1970, his junior year, was the proving ground. Doc's first assignment, the New York Mets, coming off a Miracle World Series win, who opened their season by taking advantage of a deeply thin Pirates bullpen. The team trusted Ellis to give them some length after the shit show the day before. First hitter, Tommy Agee, who in his first at-bat of the season would single off Steve Blass to start what would be a 3-for-6 day. Ellis knew Agee would be a thorn in his side, and had to deal with him accordingly. After a Bud Harrelson single and a Joe Foy flyout, Cleon Jones comes up to bat. Doc would go on to strike out 11 more Mets to put together a dominant complete game outing that only required his team to score twice to secure their first victory of the season. Doc was no stranger to coming out of the gate hot. His first game of 1969 saw him outduel Ray Washburn, who sported a magnetizing 2.26 ERA the year before. 1971 saw him pitch a complete game with 8 strikeouts against the Phillies. Doc would end up with a triumphant April, sporting a 3.12 ERA, while only allowing 1 home run in the month to Rico Carty, who would go on that year to post the highest single-season OPS in the 70s for a guy not named Hank Aaron, Fred Lynn, Willie McCovey, Carl Yastrzemski, or Willie Stargell. Not a bad guy to give your blemish to. Doc's story cannot be told without the Reds franchise. His first career start, in which he pretty much locked his role in the Pirates' rotation, was against them. If there was any external source that fueled the fire started in Thornburg Park, it was this franchise. See, the Pirates of the 1970s represented a team with soul. The Reds, however, were the machine. The big red machine, to be more specific. This contrast often pitted these two as philosophical rivals throughout the decade. Had it not been for the game Doc would pitch in a month and a half, his biggest claim to fame would occur in 3 years, when Ellis would intentionally hit the first 3 Reds he faced in an attempt to hit every batter of that game until he was pulled out. This calculated act of aggression was from someone who wanted to take every chance to prove that he was the baddest person on the diamond. Off the field, Doc was personal friends with Reds players. He would endear himself to Pete Rose's kids and would often be seen hanging out with Tony Perez. But once he stepped onto that field, it's as if the earth surrounding the stadium crumbled into oblivion, and the team who wins gets to keep what remains.
Mays at third, the 2-2 pitch to deep. Swung on a miss, he struck him out. As Dixie down ball, 1 short, 52. There's one. On the Robinson, there's 2, a double play.
This desire to prove his worth and grit came from a childhood where to escape fear means to be feared. Every time Doc was on the mound, he wanted to instill the same fear he instilled into the kids whom he would collect insurance from. What was the insurance protecting against? Doc Ellis. Doc gave hitters the same insurance as long as they didn't take his part of the plate. His part of the plate, you may ask, is, I don't know, here. Doc would cruise the first 2 innings. A Bernie Carbo groundout erases what rally the Reds would claim to. The 3rd inning ends in a run-scoring play when the nuclear weapon, disguised as the right arm of Roberto Clemente, catches Tommy Helms trying to turn an RBI single into a double. Then, the 4th inning. Ellis walks Bobby Tolan and Tony Perez when Johnny Bench comes up to the plate. This home run would solidify Doc's worst start of the season to date, and even a Willie Stargell grand slam couldn't get the Pirates back in the game. Doc had fallen to his foe. Doc wakes up on a beach in his hometown Los Angeles. Still feeling the effects of the acid from the night before, Ellis is informed that he is slated to pitch against the San Diego Padres that night. Doc with absolute certainty refutes the claim. Had he known he was pitching in San Diego, he wouldn't have made the flight to Los Angeles, nor would he have dropped the acid at the airport, or the additional tab at the beach he currently occupies. The same source shows Doc the official announcement, confirming his waking nightmare. Doc was no stranger to pitching under the influence. In fact, pitching without any sort of influence was what actually scared him more. Before any start, he would play a game with himself where he'd empty the contents of his pill bottle. Any pills that stood straight up were the lucky ones that he'd consume. If all of them lay flat, he'd just consume an indiscriminate amount. The names of these pills wouldn't really matter. Dexamyl, Benzedrine, Dexedrine. Dangerous combinations, as he would put it. In the clubhouse, everyone knew Doc was sporting a different demeanor. It was not, nor ever will be confirmed, who knew about the state of Doc's mind that day. In fact, the public at large didn't know until the 1988 revision of his pseudo-biography, where he admitted it to author Donald Hall. And as far as we know, Doc is the only person who could describe the feelings of stepping on a major league mound, one of the most isolating spots any professional athlete can cast a shadow upon, while experiencing the effects of LSD. We typically associate no-hitters with dominance. To no-hit a team means to display a level of proficiency and command over them rarely seen. At the risk of undermining the accomplishment, Doc's performance was a no-hitter in name only. A measly 3 out of his 9 innings were clean. In fact, according to GameScore, which is a stat developed by Bill James to measure the quality of a pitcher's start using basic metrics such as strikeouts, walks, and hits, Doc is tied for the third worst no-hitter since 1968. That's what happens when you walk 8 and hit 1 more just for good measure. This isn't to take away from the accomplishment, however. The Padres ranked just below league average in hitting that year and featured career years from Cito Gaston, Ed Spezio, Nick Colbert, and Ollie Brown. After 8 2/3 laboriously effective innings, Doc would get Ed Spezio on a strikeout looking to end the game. We will never know if Doc, at that moment, was able to fully realize his accomplishment. In the flurry of Doc's pulverizing routine, this might have just been another win. Doc wakes up in Los Angeles, this time the city where he's supposed to make his scheduled start. The homecoming allows for Doc to party with old friends in a relatively controlled environment, a control which is elusive to Doc. Whether it's how he controls his deep arsenal of pitches, to which he would have a high walk rate despite not being a strikeout pitcher, how he controls his substance abuse, a matter which would affect him well into his playing career and unfortunately would overshadow all his other accomplishments, or how he controlled his image, as the media was notorious for misinterpreting his comments. Doc wasn't afraid to speak his mind, but speaking his mind left him vulnerable to ravenous writers itching to put a target on his back. Doc would eventually learn to use this parasitic relationship to his advantage, as well as how to better locate his pitches. But for now, he's forming a public persona that would lead to him being called an annoying loudmouth who can't locate a fastball. The homecoming also adds extra incentive for Doc, who needs no more motivation, but is always accepting. This will be his second start in his native town. The first one didn't end so well, as Doc had particularly struggled against the Dodgers in 1969. In fact, you take out his 3 starts against them that season, and what was an uneven year levels out a bit. The start goes off without a hitch. Our old friend Maury Wills grounds out to our other old friend Freddie Patek, as Doc's sinker seems to be in midseason form. He is now retired, the last 13 batters he faced dating back to his last start after the 3rd. Then, 3 singles to center scores the first Dodgers run in the 4th. Defensive miscues, and a Billy Grabargowitz double puts the Dodgers up 3-0, signaling the end of Doc's start. Hardly a bad outing, but hardly the outing Doc was hoping for, as his team would lose 4-0. Forbes Field is often considered a crown jewel of classic stadiums. It was the first to be built with steel and concrete as opposed to wooden panels. The primary stakeholder in Forbes' construction, Pirates owner Barney Dreyfuss, was of Jewish descent, and he himself faced his fair share of discrimination. He wanted Forbes to be the symbol of a hopeful future, one where men of all creeds and races could come together to compete and share their love of baseball. His relative at the time open-mindedness led to him taking a chance on a young Honus Wagner, who would lead a team that would see Forbes' first World Series not even 4 months since its first game. And now exactly 60 years and 362 games since its opening, Doc Ellis is slated to take the mound in its 3rd to last game. The first batter was none other than Don Kessinger, who would find himself at another crossover between baseball and pop culture when he was the player-manager for the Chicago White Sox during the infamous Disco Demolition Night. He would resign a month later, being replaced by none other than future Hall of Famer Tony La Russa. He singles to center field. After Kessinger is caught stealing, a Billy Williams double fires up Doc as he strikes out Jim Hickman to get out of the first unharmed. Hickman would get his revenge on Doc with a homer to open up the 7th, but that would be the last time an opposing player even came close to second base that night, as Doc completes all 9 innings to allow his team to walk it off on an Al Oliver single. The Pirates would win their next 2 to secure the sweep and a 7-game winning streak to close their franchise tenure at Forbes. July 9th already had the fixings of an all-timer, Doc versus Carlton. What many don't know is that Steve was advocating on the same side of the aisle as Ellis, even if they didn't know it. Both were advocates for fair wages. In fact, Carlton was in the midst of a career-worst season brought upon by contractual disputes with the St. Louis Cardinals, whose notorious practices led to the dissolution of MLB's reserve clause and the inception of free agency. Ellis and Carlton were also both severely misinterpreted by the media, which eventually led to Carlton taking a vow of media silence for 12 years. Both were also heavy users of greenies. The reason behind why these two were not intrinsically linked will remain a mystery, but for now we have a game to play. Doc Ellis faces Dick Allen with the runner on in the Cardinals first. Joe Torre is on the on-deck circle. The idea of these two sharing a clubhouse, let alone batting next to each other, blows my mind. Here we have someone who essentially got blacklisted from the game for refusing to play by MLB's rules, followed by the poster child of someone who basked in the infinite riches brought forth by Major League Baseball for doing everything the right way. Allen singles before being erased in a Joe Torre double play. Doc would then go on to pitch the best 8 innings of his career. He is victorious over Carlton as the Pirates trounced on the Cardinals 6-0. According to GameScore, this start was just as dominant as the no-hitter that also happened to be against a Cardinals team that scored 60 more runs than those Padres and featured a lineup of 3 Hall of Famers and 1 should-be Hall of Famer. The Pirates wake up on the morning of September 27th on the precipice of a playoff spot. They've been fending off Billy Williams' Cubs all season, and tonight's the chance for the Pirates to secure their first playoff spot since the Miracle 1960 season. 6 months after securing their first win of the new decade, Doc Ellis is trusted to secure their first playoff berth of the decade, as he would be bookending his year against those same Miracle Mets who have since floundered. It's hard to say if Doc changed his pregame routine before tonight's start. Maybe he skipped his pill bottle routine and took what he felt he needed. Maybe he contemplated his entire life up to this moment. What we know now is that the fear is always going to be there for Doc, but tonight he's hoping that it will be behind him. Ellis gets into some first inning trouble as he wastes no time in loading the bases. A Don Clendenon single plates the first run before a signature Doc Ellis double play to second baseman Dave Cash limits the potential damage. This would be the only inning where the Mets would score a run. On the morning of June 12th, while Doc was laying on that beach, the Pirates were 28-29, 4 games behind the Cubs. Not unreasonably far out, but also not in an enviable position. The Pirates would then go 61-44 after Doc's no-hitter. One could reason that the game versus the Padres galvanized the talented club. Or maybe it didn't. Baseball is quite a chaotic sport. To pinpoint one moment as a turning point for a team's season is a fool's errand. But I like to think that in some way, somehow, Doc was the catalyst for the Pirates dynasty of the 1970s, and his no-hitter was the spark that gave the team its soul.
One strike pitch to Redmond. Right up the middle. Hernandez is back at second base. Throws from there. And that's the series. Pittsburgh wins.
Unfortunately, soul meets machine. Doc was trusted by his team to set the table for their first ever NLCS. He would not disappoint. As with the game that sent the Pirates here, Doc would experience some first inning rust, walking Tony Perez and Johnny Bench, which might have been a smart move considering the kind of years both men were having. Doc would then strike out Lee May to end the inning. Ellis would take the bend but don't break rule as he would scratch and claw his way through 9 shutout innings. Unfortunately, his team was unable to give him any run support. This is unheard of nowadays, but the Pirates, having a full 162 game sample, determined that putting out a battered and fatigued Doc Ellis was a much better option than anyone in their belabored bullpen. He is instantly greeted with a Ty Klein triple as Pete Rose drives a ball into left to score the first run of the game. After 2 fly balls, and a this time intentional walk to Johnny Bench, all Doc has to do is get Lee May, who he has made a Thanksgiving turkey out of up to this point. The Reds would go on to sweep the Pirates in 3 games. Doc had once again fallen to his foe. Continuing on with the tradition set by Barney Dreyfuss, the Pirates took chances on players of color, which led to them fielding the first all-black lineup on September 1st, 1971. Doc Ellis was the starting pitcher for that day, and unfortunately got lit up, but his team rallied behind him. They would go on to win the World Series less than 2 months later. Doc Ellis would end up winning his own battle years later by conquering his drug addiction. He would use what he learned throughout his baseball career to jump into his second career as a drug counselor. Now, any athlete could walk into a room full of addicts and not be able to in any way relate to them, even if they themselves struggled with the same addiction. But Doc had one thing most athletes don't have, and that is he understood the fear. The fear felt across every room he spoke to. It was the same fear he felt every time he took the mound. The same fear he felt when scraping the wall in Thornburg Park. The same fear he felt being approached by the white kids on his youth teams. And the same fear he felt when as a teenager he had thought he lost the game that he loved. I don't really know how to end this, so I'll just leave by reading the final paragraph of the first edition of In the Country of Baseball, written by Donald Hall, based on the life of Doc Ellis. First published in 1976, actually, which has really helped me with the research of this video. As a ball player ages, each move to another team, each spring in the Florida sun again, he moves a little closer to the time when he will retire from the noon of games to the evening porches of memory. And in the meantime, the game becomes more intense and more cherished, each season as the noon declines. Thank you.